Just bear with me a moment. Let's just pray, should we, as we come to this part of the service. Lord, just commit what I've prepared to you, Lord, and I just pray that you would take hold of it, and Lord, if there are any bits that are not of you, just get rid of them. Lord, speak to our hearts. Help us today, Lord, as we look at this sort of fairly difficult subject. Amen. Well, it's a very lightweight subject today. It's all about judgment. I don't know why I ended up getting this subject, but there you go. There appears to be an inherent tendency in human nature to pass judgment. And there's a right side to that. Sometimes we have to be sensible and we have to judge situations, but all too often our judgment is wrong. And we're going to be thinking a bit about that today. Judgment is a divine prerogative. And in the end, all judgment and the final judgment belongs to God and God alone. There is some comfort in that, because that's why we can never say totally, well, this one belongs to God and that one doesn't, and this one, etc., etc., because we don't know anybody's final destination after this life. Because in the end, it's down to God alone to judge and to receive those whom he receives. However, having said that, we can say with some confidence that if somebody in their life, even if it's just the very end of their life, believes and accepts Jesus into their heart and into their life and calls upon his name and turns in faith and professes faith to Jesus, then we can be fairly confident that at the end of life, the judgment upon them, they might be judged for all sorts of things they've done wrong, but in the end they will be accepted and received into heaven because we have a faithful God and that the most basic criteria is that we love Jesus and we follow Jesus, we believe in him and have faith in him. And I hope that everybody in this place today would say amen to that. So professing faith in Jesus is the most important aspect. But when we look at other people's lives, we can't judge them because actually we often don't know. And so we keep praying for people and asking God to come and touch their hearts and lives, don't we? Even what we think are hopeless cases, in the end, we don't know. God alone makes that judgment. So, destination is ultimately in God's hands. The problem is that all too often we put ourselves in the position of judging others. And when we do that, we're actually usurping God's position, aren't we? So, even at this early point in my talk, if we're taking Jesus' words seriously, we should be feeling fairly cautious about judging other people. By the end of it, you'll be on your knees and regretting that you ever came this morning. No, never mind. Having said that, it just seems that human beings, as we are, we seem to have this inbuilt need to apply our ethical stance to other people. And in doing so, we judge them. I read a little thing the other day, and it said that that we men probably prefer to apply Paul's teaching about marriage and about how wives should behave more than we do about ourselves. We have that tendency, don't we, to look at other people and our nearest and dearest and so on, and we make judgments about them when we ourselves are acting even worse, but we don't see it sometimes. And now here's a reality check, an honesty check. How many of us have listened to a really good sermon and thought to ourselves, oh, I do wish that so-and-so had been here to hear this. They really need to hear this message today, didn't they? You see, we have this tendency, don't we, of judgment. In the passage that we had read to us, Jesus makes it absolutely clear that the only evaluation of our lives that counts is God's evaluation. It's not our evaluation of our lives or even anybody else's. It's God's alone. We are objects of God's evaluation. You know, you could go walk around today saying, I'm an object of God's evaluation. Look at me. No, sorry. His evaluation will be based on our love for and our faith in Jesus, his Son, the one whom he sent to die on a cross for the whole of mankind. It'll also be based on our love for our neighbour. You know, it's not enough to just say, I love God, and then not love our neighbour. We've probably all got some neighbours who we find it hard to love, I guess. Others that we naturally love, but in the end, it's to do with our attitude now, our response to other people, as well as our faith and our trust in Jesus. We are called to be meek. The meek inherit the earth. And when we are truly meek, we will cease to make wrong judgments on our fellow men. And we will accept that God alone is judge. The opposite of meekness is really pride, isn't it? You know, that's the alternative. So we need to be people of meekness. Jan has said to us on more than one occasion in the past, talked about not jumping to conclusions when we see what we perceive to be wrong actions or wrong behaviour by other people. Don't jump to conclusions. And I have to confess, I've often been guilty of doing this, as Jan will tell you. And, you know, we think to ourselves, oh, I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have behaved that way. I wouldn't have done so and so. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't. When we look at other people or we hear other people, and maybe they are in the wrong. But when I say things or even think things like that, I am passing judgment. The other thing that Jan would add on to that is that before you do anything like that, look at a person's circumstances. Look at where they've come from. Look at what they're going through at the moment. Look at the hurt they're suffering. Look at the pain. Look at the poverty that they're living in or whatever. You see, until we're in their shoes, we can't possibly make a right judgment, can we? We just look at people and we react. I'd never do that. I wouldn't, you know. And it's all wrong, and I've done it. I'm sure most of us have at some time or other. Now, it is still important that we discern truth from error. And there are situations where error and wrong behaviour need to be corrected or challenged. So it's not a blind sort of response to people. Yes, we do have to at times correct things that are clearly wrong and clearly in error. You know, it's like, you know, if a child's about to put their hand into a fire, you stop them, don't you? You know, whatever the law says about how we treat children, you know, there's a sensibleness about things as well. Jesus in this passage is not saying that we can't and we're not to make necessary judgments, but he is saying that we must be very careful of offering correction in the wrong spirit, the wrong way, using the wrong words, having wrong attitudes towards a person who is being challenged or corrected. Or even maybe doing it at the wrong time. You know, there's a time for doing things, isn't there? And if we get the time wrong, what we could have said to somebody yesterday, we can't say tomorrow because things are different. So we've got to be careful about the time as well. The rather amusing but deadly serious example given in the Bible that we've just had read to us of someone we know well walking around with a speck of sawdust in their eye when we haven't even noticed, and we criticize them for that and we try and correct them for that, when we've not even noticed that there's a huge log in our own eye protruding from our eye, and we are very quick to notice the speck but are quite oblivious to the plank or the log in our own eye. That's absurd, isn't it? But we do it. We do it. We see the littlest thing that somebody is doing wrong and we criticize them or judge them, and we don't see what we're doing so easily. Now, I read this as well. There's an American pastor. It's very important that it's an American. He posed a question to his sons, two sons, aged 11 and 9. This is exactly the sort of question you'd expect an American pastor to. See, I'm passing judgment already. This is exactly the sort of question you'd expect an American pastor to ask his 9 and 11-year-olds. What negative characteristics most turn people off about Christians? Would you ask your 9 and 11-year-old that? And of course they answered, when Christians judge each other. There was a poll again in the USA. It showed that 72% of unchurched Americans agree that God exists, but the same percentage of 72% says the church is full of hypocrites. Now, I don't believe we are full of hypocrites, but I do believe that the world sees it like that all too often, for one reason or another. The church is full of hypocrites because they see it as judging people. Romans 14 says, "Why do you pass judgment on your brother? For in the end, all will stand before the judgment seat of God." See, it's not our role to judge. It's his alone. Now, this doesn't mean that we can never say anything critical or pointed to another person. And there are clearly times when that is necessary. In Matthew 18, Jesus challenges his disciples to confront believers who are actually sinning continuously. And it's also clear in the New Testament that Christian leaders are to judge both error and sin. So despite the picture sometimes painted of the ideal Christian, it is not an undiscerning, all-accepting jellyfish who is living out a blind misinterpretation of the words, "Judge not, lest you be judged." I think that's saying we've got to be sensible, we've got to be real, and there is a time to make correction and a time to say, actually, you're behaving in the wrong way. We're not jellyfishes, we're not stupid, but always, always we must do it in the right spirit, the right way, knowing the circumstances, not just jumping in with 2 feet, which often, sadly, many of us do. Paul says in Romans 14, he says in effect, the act of criticizing someone else's religious devotion is to sit in judgment over them. That then begs the question, who set you up as judge over them? the ultimate arbiter of all our actions is not us, but God. And that's good. It's good that it's down to God, not to each one of us to go around judging everybody else. Heavy stuff, isn't it? I'm coming to a close. On those rare occasions when it's really necessary to judge a situation, always remember, particularly if you're in a place of authority over somebody, always remember we are to judge with humility, not with superiority. And remember that you ultimately will be judged by God according to how you have lived, or I have lived, and how you have treated your brother, your sister, your neighbour, not on how you judged him or her. I think the key to getting this right and living this out is to always act, it's hard to do, but always act in humility. And secondly, always remembering that in the end, God alone is our judge. He's also everybody else's. Amen? Amen.